Okay, I'm here with Snoopeh from CLG.EU. We're here at DreamHack, but we're going to release this later. This is going to be kind of like some interesting things from your career I wanted to know, or high points. And so, I mean, the first place it's obvious to start off with when we talk about you, your time in SK. This was kind of a controversial period, I guess people would say. So at the end of 2011, when League of Legends was just starting to get big, you had some good results, the third and second at IEM events, the global challenges. So from your perspective, like, why did SK like blow up like that? Because if we look at the players like you and Wicked, etc., you're still top players now. This could have been like a good team going into 2012 possibly. What happened from your perspective?
I think one of the biggest issues we had was the atmosphere in the team wasn't the best. And a few things had to change that couldn't change fast enough, and we had a really good opportunity with the team that we picked up in Logic Gaming Europe, and we just wanted to jump at that opportunity, and we saw a lot of potential in it, and further going into 2012 it was the best plan for us, and it's paid off tremendously in the last year, so I don't regret it. I think it's just that time was particularly difficult, and we were actually on a good streak, we were on the up, but a couple of things that had to change probably wouldn't have changed, and from that we just decided to go with CLG.
Well, the most famous face of the SK team obviously is Ocelote. What do you think of him as a player and as a teammate? Because I mean, the two different things there, like how he's in server and how he's actually as a teammate. Was he a guy you always got along with fine? Was it contentious? What was it like?
Actually, I'm great friends with Ocelote, despite he's like had a rocky past and stuff like that. But I'm great friends with him nowadays. I think one thing I dislike when being as a teammate of him, the one thing I struggle with is his he wants to chase the stardom more than competitive. His competitive spirit is not as strong as his success-driven spirit in terms of popularity, and I think that's one thing that's hampering him throughout 2012, and I think it's going to hurt him in 2013 if he doesn't stop pursuing the fame and then focus on being competitive, because with the Koreans coming in it's really tough next year.
Actually, I think that's something that I heard Aaron say before he rejoined SK, that part of the reason he left beforehand was because Ocelote put too much focus on his solo streaming and kind of making himself the brand, and he didn't feel like he was putting enough into... do you need to check that? Okay. He didn't feel like he was putting enough attention to actually the team and the competitive aspect. And obviously, the thing that SK have been kind of infamous for now is that they cycle through players, their fifth or fourth player, they're getting new ones all the time. Are these two things tied together? Is this part of the reason they've struggled to get a solid five? Because I mean, yours is a great example of a team that's just kept 5 players the whole time.
I would definitely say it's one of the problems. It's not the only problem, but it's definitely one of the problems that held SK back. I mean, I think Osa's aware of it himself, and he's trying to change it, but it's a lot for him to sacrifice, because he's benefiting a lot of it individually, but after all, it's a team game. So if you want to be competitive, you need to stay at the top, and you need to put the practice in, and you can't just focus on streaming. It's combined with other things like the players that they picked up weren't that great, or they couldn't commit enough, for example. But overall, it's combining factors. It's not the only factor, but it's combining factors. Since
you were a teammate of his, just as a last question on this topic, I wanted to get kind of your perspective on him as a player, because on one hand, since he's such a kind of polarizing figure, people are either huge fans of his and they'll say, oh, he's the best at his position, or people go the other way and they go, you know, online he's never that good, and yeah, he does okay at some of the lands, but the team isn't that good. Like, where does he kind of rank up in being objective, you know? Where do you think he stacks up to his position in the world?
He's definitely not one of the top AP players in the world right now. That's safe to say. I think he might even admit that himself. There's the Korean AP mids, a lot of the top European mids like Froggen, Alex, Extinct. They are much better than him at the moment. I don't see him. I honestly don't see him getting to their level in the next year. I'll be honest. I don't think he has the commitment to become better. Actually, it's not even necessarily about commitment. I just think he's limited. I think he's limited as a player, an individual, that he will not get better. I think he's capped at that point. It's unfortunate, because imagine he could become so good, plus have this sort of fame thing. It'd be great for esports, but I don't think it's going to happen next year, honestly.
So when you left SK and you made this CLG team, it's still the same lineup you have now, I think, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, so it was actually a few months before you really got to have some success online, like going to big tournaments, etc. But then you had this strong summer, and you've been one of the top teams ever since. Did the team click initially, early on, and you knew we're going to stick with this lineup no matter what? Was it something that developed through the years, or a specific point of time when you knew we're a top team now? How is it from your perspective?
I think initially we were actually set out, when we first made the team, we were set out to go to Hanover, Kiev, IEM Kiev it was. Oh, okay. We were meant to go there, but some organisational screw-ups mean we didn't get the spot that we had already had, and consequently couldn't go to IM Hanover because of that. So it was unfortunate, and that's why the first few months were kind of slow. I think it would have actually got up to a faster start, providing we could have went to that. But since we got our first small event, was in France for Gamers Assembly, we actually didn't do too great there, but it taught us a lot. And then moving on to our next event, which was DreamHack, which we actually won, like took first place, climbed all the way through the BYOC to get there. I think that was a huge thing for us. The key point, I would say, was when we went to Korea. Everyone at that point had quit school, because up until that point we hadn't all quit school. And everyone had quit school at that point, and we went to Korea for 2 months for the OGN spring tournament. And when we went there and we lived in these small rooms, small gaming rooms, small apartment rooms, and we played 10 hours a day with each other, we grew really close as friends. And I think if you can do that in such an intense environment, I think it shows testament to the strength of your team in terms of communication, in terms of like the team bond as well. And I think that's why we stayed together for the last 12 months, is from that time we spent in Korea.
Okay, that's a good topic to go on to actually, because I wanted to ask you, from just listening and reading about the other teams that went to Korea or who have been to these, tried living in like a house together, it seems like everyone going into it always thinks, oh yeah, we're going to get so much better playing all day long. But it seems like, I mean, example, the other CLG team, they kind of came to the opposite conclusion, like, okay, maybe it doesn't work for us to all be like at each other's throats, all stuck in a steel cage, you know, or playing all day long. Maybe we're better if we just play a little bit. But it sounds like you're saying like, maybe the Korean style of just this hardcore practice, was this something that like works for your team in your particular bunch of guys?
I think one factor, if you look at CLG.NA as a prime example, they have a lot of big egos and personalities in their team, whereas in our team there's not so much, there's no egotistical maniacs, there's no conflict as such, there's no big conflicts at least. There is some conflicts but no big conflicts. So when they went into that really small environment and played again for day in, day out, they just clashed, whereas we don't have those egos, so it's less common for us to clash. And so we benefited out of the practice. They benefited out of practice as well, but when egos clashed, that's when it came to like crunching point, and it just like performance just suffered because of that. Okay,
the period actually just before you went to Korea, this was kind of when Moscow 5 were becoming like the team who was just, everyone said they were unbeatable, you know, they were never going to lose, but you were actually one of the few teams who beat them and who was actually on offline, this is like challenging them. How do you compare your level then to now, and has Moscow 5 stayed at the same level and everyone's caught up, or have they dipped down? How do you think the two things are?
I would say we improved since then. Basically, just our approach to practice and things like that in general, and general skill level and communications of teams improved since then. And I think Moscow 5 was doing okay up until World Finals, but ever since then they have dipped. I think when they placed top 4 and didn't get, like, they lost to Taipei Assassins, I think they suffered a lot in morale or something like that. Their confidence got shaken, and I think they've definitely suffered for that, because recently in the past couple of online tournaments they've done not so great at all. They've lost to teams they shouldn't lose to, and I'm really concerned about them going into 2013, because I actually like having them like a really top team in Europe for us to play against. It's one thing we actually lack, or did lack. And now we're coming back to Europe and their performance is going down. It's not good for us, because not having that team to play against is going to suffer. Like, we're not going to improve because of that. So I hope they can pick it up for 2013, but we'll see.
Since a lot of people who come from the other games in esports, or the games that are considered more skilled, like the StarCrafts, the Quakes, etc., I've heard you've been quite like a vocal, say, proponent of League of Legends, like standing up for it. And what's interesting is one of the arguments I've heard you make reminds me of when people used to try and stand up for CS against Quake, when Quake said, oh, CS there's not very much skill. People used to say, yeah, but the skill maybe isn't in like the firing, but it's in like the team aspect. Like, you need the relationships to be amazing, you need to have the strategy element. Is this kind of how you see it in League of Legends? Like, what the unique thing about League of Legends is a type of game?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. When I spoke to some StarCraft players like Violet, Stefano and stuff like that, they all agree that they could never be in a team. Their mindset would not allow them to be in a team. And that's one of the huge differences, and I agree, StarCraft requires more skill. I'm not disputing that. But when League of Legends is an entirely different ball game when it comes to 5 people communicating and coordinating at the same time. Same with Dota, it's the exact same thing. StarCraft is harder than Dota, everyone knows that, but in Dota you have the 5 people who have to communicate like every minute or every second of the game with each other, and it's something a StarCraft player just could not do, or a Quake player probably could not do.
In terms of the communication aspect of League of Legends and building up like the team relationships, the thing that I find strange as an outsider looking in on League of Legends is that in Counter-Strike, another famous team game, it was very, very rare that you ever had a team that even had two nationalities in the same team. They would all be everyone from Sweden, everyone from Finland, and when they did try those experimental lineups, even just bringing in one player who might even be able to understand the language, it would often be problems, especially if everyone had to do like common language was English. Well, in your team, I mean, basically, I think everyone aside from you isn't a native English speaker. So how has it been? Have there been any difficulties in terms of developing the communication thing? Because the main thing is in CS, people used to say, yeah, you can say the basic things, but if in like 5 seconds you have to quickly relay some really important information, it's hard to be like specific to someone who's not that native. Is this an issue?
At first it was a bit slow, and it was actually, the funny thing is it was my English that they weren't understanding, not me not understanding. Yeah, because my accent's quite thick. It's improved a lot since like when I first started, but that was the hardest hurdle in the first like month or so, was overcoming the language barrier for me. I had to slow down a bit more and speak a bit slower and clearer. But their English is all really good. They're all fluent in English, and it's absolutely no issue whatsoever in communication. Like even if it's something like come up in 5 seconds, like they can say it like quite easily. There's no issues there.
If we think about the first period when we went to that first Azubu Champion Spring thing, this was when people really saw like, okay, we knew there were good European teams, Moscow 5, etc. We knew there were good North American teams, but now we can see there's like a bunch of really good Korean teams as well. Do you think it's the case that with the Koreans having this similar mentality that they had in StarCraft, like they're willing to just break the game down into each part and practice all day long more than anyone else? Do you see it being the case that say in a year, in 2 years, there'll be like 50% of top teams might be Korean?
Definitely. I definitely will see that, and I think the European and North American teams are going to have to do a lot to catch up. One of the big things is like the Korean teams, for example, they have a strict schedule they follow every single day, and they arrange practice like a week in advance almost. We do things like a night before, they do it a week in advance. So they wake up, they go to the gym, they say we're going to play like 4 or 5 hours of solo queue, then we're going to do like an hour of mechanics. And an hour of mechanics means they sit under the tower themselves in a game and just hit minions and making sure they're like proficient at last hitting. We would never do that in the Western world. And then they would scrim for 8 hours at a time and then analyze that afterwards. It's so much time to commit in a day that we Westerners just take it for granted, like the freedom we have, and we don't spend as much time. And we need to create strict schedules next season for 2013, or we're not going to stay at the top, and the Koreans will dominate, especially with KT roster and SK Telecom picking up 2 teams each. Like the amount of teams that Korea has is growing and growing. So we're really going to suffer next season if we don't take it more serious.
Yeah, that's something I want to go on to now actually, is the fact that the big change that seems to have happened beyond just League of Legends is that since StarCraft 2 didn't take off so much in Korea, it seems like Korea is actually switching over to League of Legends to some degree. And so I would imagine that will probably mean all the Kesper teams, like SK Telecom, etc., but all the other ones will probably eventually pick up their own League of Legends team. So you'll have all these pro houses, but with like a full team themselves. Do you think the teams who are from Europe or from North America who haven't been to Korea, do you think they understand like what's coming essentially, or do they just think the status quo is going to stay as it is? What's your perspective? How do you see things from talking to them or the way they behave?
Unless the teams have been to Korea, for example, like Dignitas, ourselves, or Fnatic, or CLG.EU, they don't know. They're very naive. Like Moscow 5 thought they were going to stomp the World Finals, and then they didn't. It was 2 Asian teams. It was a Taiwanese team, which no one really expected, and then a Korean team second. And no one expected that. In Moscow 5, it was considered the strongest team in the world. And they were like really naive about the Koreans, and this is the early times. Like next year is going to be way harder than it is this year, and especially your TSNs, for example, in America, they laughed at the Koreans. They were laughing at CLG for losing to Koreans, and they're going to be they lost to Azubu Blaze like 0-8 now at tournaments. So they're definitely very naive, and they're actually not aware of how strong they are unless they've been in the environment in Korea and seen the mentality of the Koreans. They're not aware, and they're going to be taken by surprise next year.
Of the Korean teams, are Azubu Blaze the best ones? I mean, these are the guys who you've kind of narrowly lost to a bunch of times. Are they the ones who stand head and shoulders above the rest, or is it a tight pack? What do you think?
It was actually Frost. We've not actually played against Blaze yet. It was Frost we played against, Azubu Frost.
Okay, Frost.
And we lost to them in OGN, the championships, 2-3, and we also lost to them in the finals, 2-1. And they were really, really close games. And I think we could still take a game off them right now. But other teams like Najin's Sword, Azubu Frost, the new KT roster B, for example, they're really strong teams. Blaze is a strong team as well, but there's just so many of them that I can't even keep up with it anymore. There're just so many top teams coming out of Korea that I don't even know what to do anymore. Like, we need to get buckled down and practice.
One of the issues in StarCraft is that even if the players from the West are as good as the Koreans, like maybe skill-wise they're really good, or strategy they're on the same level, or even confidence, a big problem seems to be that the Koreans get really good at having like super consistent mechanics. Like they're always capping out like how fast the outs are. Does this actually matter enough in League of Legends that will be an issue as well? Are there players in the West, for example, who have like mechanics as good or better than the Korean players?
Yeah, I don't think it comes into play for League of Legends as much. There is a couple of Western players, Double Lift for example, he plays an exceptional AD carry, and he does most Koreans and Asians at this point in time at least. I think there is definitely mechanics in League of Legends, but there's the skill cap's not rated like that high that it's unattainable by the Westerners. So I think it more comes into team play and coordination and practice and like innovation, things like that come more into play than a skill cap necessarily.
In terms of your position, the jungler, who is the guy who comes to mind if I say like a guy who's you consider really good, and it always is a great matchup when the two of you face off each other? Is there someone comes to mind when I say that?
It was previously Diamond Prox, but because I've been traveling so much and I've not been in Europe for the last 5 months, I've not had a chance to play against him. I would probably rate junglers like Watch from, what is it? Najin's Sword and Cloud Templar from Azubu Frost. Those are like my nemesis. I would consider them my nemesis when I go against them. Those are the hardest opponents I've had to face.
Just from your own perspective, do you consider yourself like the best foreign jungler or equal to whoever's the best out there? Is there someone who actually tops you? What do you think?
I don't think anyone tops me in jungling overall. I think I'm at least equal or better than most Western junglers, at least. There's one exception. I would say Diamond Prox he played a different style of jungling. He was more carry orientated, and I was more like a supportive team orientated jungler, which is different roles, so you can't really compare them. But overall, like as jungling moved towards a more supportive role, I perform that role better than he does. So I would say I stand out above most junglers.
A high profile move, and one that links into you, is that on the CLG Prime team, Hotshot moved over to doing the jungle for a while. What's your assessment of how it worked out in terms of like his individual game there?
I think it wasn't a great move, honestly. They've now actually switched up again recently, and he went back to top lane, and Chowster moved into jungle. I think that's a good change. The one before that wasn't a great change. They put it down to his limited champion pool. When you're jungling, you also need a bigger champion pool, so it's not really an excuse. And I think the way they have it now is better, like him back to top lane and then Chowster jungle is better. So I don't think it was really worth it.
Okay, as a final question, you've seen how far League of Legends has come even in 1 year. I mean, I remember like at the Gamescom in 2011, League of Legends was like an exhibition tournament or something. It wasn't even considered like a full esport. Now it's in theory the biggest esport, and there's potential maybe to break out even more. Where do you see League of Legends in a year, and where will you be in a year in terms of League of Legends?
I think one thing is, because Riot's stepping in and making it a legitimate profession in a sense, they're paying salaries to players and creating a really strict structure throughout the year for like there's going to be a 10-week period where teams play twice a week at a location that really high production values. I think it's really going to take esports to a new level, and I don't foresee I hope other companies pick it up. I hope Blizzard steps up. I hope Valve steps up. I think Valve will actually, but I don't know if Blizzard will. And I really hope they do, because I think Riot is setting a new bar where developers can come in, and it's not. I don't think it's artificially inflating an esports scene. To be honest, they're just doing what I think developers should do to help grow it. And hopefully the other developers do pick that up. And I think League of Legends is going to stay big. It's going to stay huge. There's like bigger numbers next year. Bigger sponsors are coming in, and organizations, players, and like broadcasters are going to benefit from that. And I hope it continues, and I hope other developers pick up the same thing coming into 2013, 2014.
And how about you? Where will your career be in a year?
I will be very, very well off next year, and I'm very happy about that. I'm very fortunate, and I take every day as it comes, but I'm really looking forward to the next year. And I would like to do a lot more things for the UK. I want to grow the UK scene, not just for League of Legends, but more PC gaming itself. Like, I hate the fact it's so limited to console. So when I get back to Germany next year, I'm going to try and fly out more to the UK and help grow things like that. That's one of my expectations for next year, like one of my goals next year is try help the UK esports scene a bit more. Okay,
any final words, any message you want to give to people who watch this?
I'd like to thank all the fans for supporting us over the past year, and good job getting to the end of the video. It's quite a long interview. And also thanks to our sponsors, Razer, XMG, On3D and Illubuff. You were fantastic over the last year helping us get to all these events, so thanks very much.